Welcome to the Church of Thomas, Paul as Apostle, 1:7-11. Many knew Jesus. Most people who studied at his feet were called disciples. There were a select few that were called apostles. Now, when you look at the number that is mentioned in the New Testament, there is a magic number called 12. And it was the people that Jesus purportedly selected as apostles. Now, the number may have varied, but because 12 was a magical number, it represented the 12 tribes of Israel, then it was stuck to, and the names that were gathered together into this list for the New Testament were all men. There is a lot of debate about whether there were probably quite a few women in there, and the number was probably not 12. And that being said, the way to be an apostle was to actually study at Jesus' feet. If you were not there for first-hand information about the parables, all you were doing is getting them second or third or fourth or fifth hand. He actually had an explanation that went with every single one of these parables, which meant that unless you were there to hear the explanation, how were you supposed to know what the true meaning of any of these parables were? Therefore, there was a class of individuals who studied with Jesus that were named apostles. Now, there was one person who, in his earlier life, was a great one for persecuting not just the Jews who stepped out of line as far as the Romans were concerned, but the newfound movement called Christianity. A man who was persecuting the Jews and the newfound group of Christianity was called Saul. He worked for the Romans and threw many of the new Christians in jail for worshiping God through Jesus. He was chastised on his way by Jesus. The Spirit of Jesus came to him and said, "Why are you persecuting my people?" And he was told to stop it. After that, he became Paul. He adopted a new name and a new persona and became a Christian. Now, for this, I'm very happy because he reached out to people who were not Jewish. The only problem is that to make himself credible to the non-Jews, he donned a mantle that he did not deserve. He started calling himself an apostle. He also was one of the few people who taught about Jesus who had never met him in person, never studied a single word in person. Every bit of information that he got was second, third, fourth, fifth hand. Now, he did a great job of relaying a lot of these messages of loving each other and forming groups and things like this. But he was not an apostle. It's kind of telling that most of the people who studied with Jesus had very modest introductions in their letter. We're a servant of God. We were a disciple of Jesus. I was the brother of Jesus. This is the way most of the people who sat at Jesus' feet described him after his death. Here's a verse that will illustrate what I mean about how Paul, the new Christian called Paul, described himself, and it is far from modest. It is Romans 1:1-6. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, the gospel concerning his Son, who was descended from David according to his flesh, and was declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by resurrection from the dead. Jesus Christ our Lord, through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for the sake of his name, including yourself, who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. This is the most long-winded description of what somebody can be by somebody who never studied with Jesus. I think that it's important to understand that if you're going to take on a title, it would be good to at least have the information set aside to do it. It's like saying you're President of the United States or a Class A surgeon when all you did was look at a book. It doesn't make you an apostle. Reconciler, Gospel of Thomas, verse 12. Jesus' student asked, "Who will lead us when you are gone?" Jesus answered, "Ask the one for guidance. But my youngest brother James, the just, can be of help because he is the salt of the earth." In this verse, Jesus is actually extolling the virtues of not just his brother, but the reason why he was to be looked for to God for guidance is because he was humble and the salt of the earth. He was not into flowery language and trying to convince people of his worth by a long-winded discussion of himself. God bless the whole world, no exceptions. Angel Eliza.